You there?
All right, perfect. So thanks, Marty. That last session was fascinating. And I will just say it's pretty hard to follow that. So I'm gonna mix up my presentation a little bit today. You know, I've been in this family office industry for over 30 years. I'm happy to answer any questions. I was just up here a couple of weeks ago speaking to 450 people on trends in the family office industry. So if people have questions, I'm happy to talk about that. I want to give you a little background in terms of me so that you understand why I'm talking to you about what I'm talking about today. So as Marty said, I've been in the industry 30 years, had my own, I started a single family office, the Field family of Chicago, spent 8 years there, built my own multifamily office called Simrick, sold that in 2009 to GenSpring, which was the largest MFO at the time in the industry, and ran the Western region, everything west of the Mississippi for 5 years, consultant for 3 more years. Along the way, I formed a company called Policy and Taxation Group. Not advancing, Marty.
You're plugged in and worst case, I can just give you the laptop. You always run with a laptop then.
Okay, so why don't you move on to the next slide?
Okay. Or you can just move on 1 second here.
So I formed Policy and Taxation Group in 1995.
So you're off camera, so you have to get.
Over this way?
Yeah.
Okay. I don't want to stand in front of the screen. So maybe I'll do this. How's
Right
this?
there, perfect, right there.
Okay.
And a little bit, right, yeah, perfect, great.
Okay. I formed Policy and Taxation Group in 1995 because I had a 38-year-old client die and I had to deal with what we now call the death tax. And her mother died 5 years later. So I felt that the death tax, state tax was a horrible tax and somebody needed to try and fix it. And so I went to DC very stupidly and naively and told members of Congress they need to fix it. At the time, they didn't even know there was an estate tax. I used to say, I'm here to talk about the estate tax, and they'd say, you better go home and talk to the states about that. And I said, no, not state. So that organization is still in existence. I run it today. It is supported by family offices and successful individuals. And it has expanded its missions. So now it works on all tax and economic issues, not just estate tax, that affect successful individuals. And the reason this is important to all of you, because you're all investment people, you're all worried about the bottom line. And if you're really smart investment people, you need to worry about the after-tax bottom line. And legislation will affect your bottom line. You know that, and you can impact it. Most people don't believe they can, but you can. So we're in a very difficult political environment. I'm going to talk a little bit about that. But I understand from Marty that you already had somebody talk to you this morning about tax policy, right? That's possible.
Talking about the tax laws that are going to expire at the end of 2025.
Right, and what's possible?
So we didn't really discuss the possibility of it being renewed or not. If you
Okay,
have any
all right.
information on that, that'd be great.
I'll get into that, but I want to make sure you all connect the dots and understand why I'm talking to you about family businesses, because you might say, you know, this is a family office group, right? Family businesses, family offices are more often than not a family business. So it is important to talk about it. On top of that is right now, you can appreciate with the Congress where it is, you can't get an appointment with the Democrat if you're going to go in and talk about tax policy. But if you want to go in and talk about family business, that you're going to get an appointment. And I'm going to talk to you about a Congressional Family Business Caucus that we got formed with 42 members, Democrats and Republicans. And the purpose of this caucus is to educate members of Congress about family businesses. And the more we elevate family businesses, the better opportunity we have to impact tax policy. So connect the dots there. I mean, I've been working in DC for over 30 years, and strategically, I understand how this works. So you can go to the next slide, Marty. So the way I do that is the next organization, which is Family Enterprise USA. It is a 501c3 not-for-profit. The board of this organization came to me about 4 years ago and said, can you take it over? It became inactive, but it has a great brand. It was formed in 2007 by the Roundhurst family of Minneapolis. Simple mission: promote generationally owned family businesses and their lifetime of savings. Very important organization. And we run that as a sister organization to Policy and Taxation Group, separate boards, separate organizations. Family Enterprise USA is a 501c3. It can accept donations from private foundations. We're a unique charitable organization because we support economic growth in this country. not like most not-for-profits that don't necessarily have this mission. Marty, you can move on. So I'm going to go through some of these slides quickly. I'm going to talk about family businesses. I realize this isn't a family business audience, so I may skip through some of the slides, but remember why I'm talking to you about it. So family businesses, there are 32 million of them in America. You can flip the next slide. The reason they're important is because 87% of the businesses in America are family-owned businesses. So think about that. Next. You have to go quicker, Marty. They generate 83 million jobs in this country. On the next slide, you'll see 59% of the workforce, or 54% of the GDP. On the next slide, $7.7 trillion. Next slide. That's why members of Congress are listening to us. That's why they're very important. Next slide. So we do an annual survey. I have some of those results. Again, interrupt me anytime. If this isn't relevant to what you want to hear from, I'm happy to talk about other things. But this is, I'll tell you why it's important. Go ahead, Marty. 789 respondents in 40 states. Go ahead. EY is our platinum sponsor. They're wonderful to us. They really support the work that we do, and they supported this survey. Go ahead. This is how we distribute the survey. We work with 40 family business centers around the country. You've probably been to some of their workshops. There's not that many here in California, which is kind of sad. So you have Cal State Fullerton, been around 25 years. You have Loyola, that's relatively new. UCLA is trying to get something up and running. USC's never been able to get theirs up and running. But these are all across the country. Next slide.
Can I just make one quick remark?
Yeah.
That the demographics in the United States are changing dramatically, a lot of Hispanics, and Hispanics tend to be family-owned businesses. They tend to go start their own businesses, be entrepreneurial, et cetera. So it's actually very applicable to them as well.
Yeah, that's a good point. Most of the family businesses that attend these workshops are multi-generational, and so they tend to be on the medium to larger size. And I'll give you some statistics around that if you want to go on to the next slide. These are just some of the other universities. We now have 5 trade associations, which trade associations work on your business issues, but they don't work on the family's issues of the business. So we now have 80,000 new members with these 5 trade associations, including American Trucking Association. You can go on. So this is an overview. I'm just sharing with you some of the slides that are important. 78% of family businesses are pass-through entities. Why is that important? Because that means they're paying 37% in income tax, and corporate America gets to pay 21%. So everybody thinks that the last tax bill was wonderful, and it was pretty wonderful for some people. But family businesses are still paying a higher rate of tax, almost 80% of them, than corporations are. Next slide. 75% of them operate through trusts. We didn't know this. This is the first time we've ever asked that. And that's important because members of Congress are trying to eliminate trusts. The last Build Back Better Act, that's exactly what was proposed. Elimination of grantor trusts. Think of what that would do to our businesses and also a lot of industries. Next slide. They're in various industries. Most members of Congress think that our country is all about family farms. Only 4% of the respondents are actually agriculture. 22% are in manufacturing. So our country is made up of different businesses than it used to be. And this is what members of Congress need to understand. Manufacturers, construction, real estate, they all have the same illiquid nature of their assets that farming does. And yet most of the exemptions in our tax code revolve around farming. This is why we meet with them. This is why we share the survey with them. This is information that most of them aren't aware of. Next slide. Family businesses plan their business as a legacy, right? We all know that. 32% of them have been in business 50 to 100 years, and 81% over 20 years. How many public companies have that kind of statistic? So again, we're telling members of Congress, support the family businesses in America. 70% of them have generations of employees. So that means, mother, daughter, cousin, aunt, uncle are working in the business, multiple generations of employees, a thing that most of us don't even think about in normal businesses. Marty, next slide. 50% of them give to a local charity. So or a local of a national charity. This was actually 70% last year. So that's important because that local giving goes away if the family business goes away. Next slide. Family offices, first time we asked this question. Well, it's not a surprise to me, 67% of them do not have family offices. But I think they don't necessarily know what a family office is. And so they may have one embedded in their family business, but they don't even realize that's what it is. Marty, next slide. For those that do have a family office, I don't think this is a surprise either. 79% of them are single family offices. Next slide. And this was a little surprising to me because when the industry started in the 90s, and I was around then, this is what the family offices did most of the time. They were more administrative, counting, tax, less investment focused. But this is what we're finding out, which may be unique to our family businesses, that 57% still perform that function as their primary function. So again, I think it might be a little different if for non-family businesses. Next slide. Economic overview. Okay, so in terms of the size, you can see that 25% of them have over 50 million a year in annual revenues. But if you add up the red here, we discovered 15% of our family businesses have over $100 million a year in revenue. So again, we believe that a family business, once they're generational, they start thinking about legislation and how it's going to impact them and how advocacy is important to their business. They pay better in terms of wages and benefits. So these are all statistics that members of Congress are fed so that they understand why they're important and why they should have tax policy that's going to help family businesses. So this is the policy overview in terms of what is important to them. We ask, what is your most important tax policy and what's your most important economic policy? Tax policy, you can see that this year income tax is first, but look where it was compared to 2023. It's down substantially, and so is the estate tax, down substantially. Still 2, but down. Why is that? Look at this, the wealth tax. Okay, 5% of the respondents said wealth tax is my biggest concern in terms of tax policy. Now, that's not a big percent, but this wasn't even on the radar last year. This wasn't even an issue last year. And you should know, Marty knows, we do a lot of work with Frank Luntz, and I want to talk about the next generation focus group we just did. 70% of the voters in this country support a wealth tax. They don't even know what that is. They don't even know who pays and who doesn't pay. They don't know what fair share is. But 70% of the voters believe the wealthy in this country, which is why we call them successful individuals instead, support a wealth tax. And that movement is just increasing. 2023, the top economic policy was income tax and then estate tax, simplifying the tax code. And their number 4 was the debt. This is more of a, next slide is more for the actual family businesses, because look what they rated number 1 now, the federal debt. They understand what debt does to a company, so they really understand what it does to a country. So they're very worried about the national debt. And next is income tax, and then you've got estate taxes number 4. Move on. And again, this is the first time we asked this question because we actually got Congressman Arrington on April 15th to introduce an estate tax rate reduction bill. We've been working with them last 3 sessions of Congress. And this time it was even harder. If you don't know what's happening in DC, not much. We still work at it. We play defense and offense. Last year, only 26 bills passed Congress, the lowest in the history of this country. That's not to say you shouldn't do something. It's just to say, understand the difficult climate that we're working in to get something done. So to get this estate tax, gift to state and generation skipping tax rate reduction bill introduced, while it's not bipartisan this year, which is disappointing, is a big deal. So Arrington said, can you go back a second? Arrington asked us, well, how can I explain how reducing the rate is going to help this country? Well, this is how that's going to explain. We asked our business owners, if you pay less in taxes, what are you going to do with the money? Well, they're going to reinvest in their business, and then they're going to pay their employees better. Only 8% of them said, I'm going to pay myself more money. And members of Congress think if you give them more money and you reduce taxes, they're just going to pay themselves more. So again, all these are compelling arguments in terms of how we can change tax policy. Okay, so I mentioned the Congressional Caucus. You can move on to the next slide. It's Education Caucus. It's a bipartisan caucus. It has to be bipartisan, has to be educational, not policy. Otherwise, we wouldn't get Democrat support. If you want to move on to the next slide. These are our co-chairs. We have a caucus meeting next week in Washington, D.C. If you have any family business owners that want to come. We have, the theme is succession. We have a panel of family business owners. We have members of Congress that come in the room. We have 50 to 100 people attending. We record it. We put it on social media. We send it all out. It's a really, really important voice for family businesses.
Was Marcy Kaptur part of this at some point? I think I don't know if she's in Congress anymore. She was.
No, not that I know of. I mean, you can go to the next slide. You can see the list.
Yeah.
So this is the 42 members that we have. It's about 40% Democrat. We try to keep it about 50-50 because we believe in bipartisanship. And it's really gaining traction. We had 3 meetings last year. We have 3 meetings this year. It's their caucus. They continue to remind us it's their caucus, but we do all the work. We fund it. Anything that needs to be funded. And we do all the back work. All right, before I get into the political and tax policy changes possible, questions, comments? Again, I'm happy to answer anything.
How frequently does this group meet? The
caucus,
Yeah.
3 times a year. And that's important because members of Congress all want to know how much work is going to be involved, and there's too much work. They're not going to get on it. Even with only 3 times a year, some of them say that's just too much work.
Are those caucus meetings open to the general public?
Yes. Yes. It's on and next week. It's the 14th. It's actually in Longworth 1539. That's the room it's in. So we actually do it on the Hill in one of their buildings, so they'll be more inclined to come.
How do you publicize it to the general public?
It is somewhat by invitation, okay, because we have a limited amount of space because we have it on the Hill. So if someone's interested, they let us know. We have a general email going out saying it's happening.
Do you broadcast it?
Yeah, but they have to contact John Gugliana, who's on my team, or John Marino is on my team, and say, we're interested in coming, and then we give them the details.
But how do you find the broadcast? Is it on YouTube or something, or do you have a channel?
We do put the actual caucus meeting, and the last 3 are on our YouTube channel.
Okay.
Yeah, so Family Enterprise USA has a YouTube channel. So does Policy and Taxation Group. So again, it can't emphasize this enough. It's our way to get to members of Congress. It's our voice for family businesses as well as family offices. Because you can appreciate that when you say family offices in DC, you don't get a lot of traction with members of Congress. And that's just the way it is. So
You got about 5 minutes.
okay, why don't you move on? All I'm going to say here is we all know who's running for president. You can move to the next slide. These are the 7 states that are in play. So you've probably heard about these 7 states forever. These 7 states are going to dictate the election. So not that your vote doesn't matter if you don't live on these 7 states, but they are going to control the vote. Okay. So you want to move to the next slide? The consensus is that the Republicans are going to lose the House. And this is from Democrats and Republicans, and the Democrats are going to pick up the House. I don't know what the margins are going to be, but that's generally what's going to happen. The reason that's important to you is because tax policy starts in Ways and Means in the House. Doesn't have to, it can start in the Senate, but it does typically. The game is really plays in the Senate. So if you want to move on, the good news is that Senate, was the last one Senate? Are they out of order?
The other one
Okay.
was,
Senate, okay.
no, the other one was, right.
Senate.
Republicans are taking control of the Senate, yes.
Okay, so Republicans take control of the Senate. You can see the states that are in play and why they're in play. This is again a pretty consensus, and the reason the Senate's important is because the House does what the House does, and they send the legislation to the Senate. But if it doesn't get to pass the Senate, it's not going anywhere. The Senate, the game is in the Senate. I've learned that all these years. And I remind you that our president only signs bills into law. He doesn't make legislation. He may encourage legislation. He has his budget and his green book and all those things, but he doesn't actually make the laws. Congress makes our laws. So who controls the Senate and the House to some extent is important. So move on. So what are the possible outcomes of the election in terms of policy? Well, if the Republicans take a sweep, it's pretty obvious what's going to happen. They're going to try to make everything that was in TCJA, the last tax bill, permanent, right? A lot of those are going to expire. I'll talk about those, but you know what they are. Income tax is going to go back up. Capital gains is going to go back up. 199A is going to go away. Estate tax exemption is going to go away. All of those things, or it's going to be reduced. They're going to make sure that doesn't happen, as well as some other things. You want to move on? If Democrats take a sweep, childcare credit, they're going to increase, they're going to remove SALT, increase taxes on corporation, extend energy tax credits. They're going to tax the top income payers even more, and they're going to impose a mark to market, which is a really big deal, which I'm going to talk about a little bit. You want to move on. So if there's a split government, they actually can do things that they agree on. Not many, but they can. And one of those is, reducing the foreign investment of China in the United States, as well as some of these other things where they're not extensive, but there are some things. Move on, Marty. So taxing the wealthy is what you all want to pay attention to. As I already said, voters support a wealth tax. Last year in the Senate, Budget Committee and Senate Finance, there were 2 hearings. Look at the names of these hearings. They made it very clear what they were doing. They're going to tax the wealthy one way or another. It's going to happen depending on who controls. I really find this pretty offensive, cracking down on wealthy tax cheats, but that's where we are today as a country. You can move on, Marty. Most of you are probably familiar with Senator Wyden's proposal. It's been around a long time. I will say he doesn't have enough Senate Democrats to support it. And it's very complicated and it's very hard to understand. But what he wants to do is tax unrealized gains over and over and over again. For family businesses or any illiquid asset, you're going to have your business or your asset valued every year, and you're going to have to pay a tax on that valuation. And for a lot of businesses, you may not have the liquidity to pay that tax. So this has gotten some traction. This is our Secretary Yellen, of course. She wants to continue to tax anyone making over $400,000 and is investigating those. And if you go to the next slide, this is what the IRS has already come up with this year. And this is a month old, $520 million. So when I say you're being investigated, they're asking for your trust documents. They're asking for insurance documents and policies. They're asking for things they've never asked for before because they truly are trying to go after the wealthy, as they call them. We can move on. So these are the final few slides. In conclusion, this is the tax policy that's this year. We're very disappointed that this bill that was passed by the House went to the Senate, sitting at the Senate. It's not going anywhere in the Senate because it includes things that are very important to family business: restoring bonus depreciation, deductibility of interest, R&D expensing, which has been devastating to so many family businesses that do a lot of R&D. So they can't expense anymore. It's been true for the last year. Plus, they have to capitalize over 5 years. So some of them have literally stopped all their R&D. This has bipartisan support. It's really pathetic that it can't get done. There is hope. There's some small hope that it could get done at the end of the year, and maybe in some bill that'll happen next year. Because next year is the first year of a new regime, there's usually a tax bill in the first year. So we're hitting the ground now with what's going to happen, because this is what's going to happen. All these things are going to expire. So we have to play offense with our rate reduction bill and other legislation, and we have to play defense against all those things that expire at the end of the year. So I think that's it, Marty. So questions, comments?
Are you going to share these slides?
I'm happy to. If you want to give me your card, I can email them too.
Yeah.
I'll also distribute them over the, when I send the follow-up email to the group.
So my message is this: believe me, legislation is going to impact you. And if you're not part of the solution, you won't like the answer. So, I'm an advocate of advocacy. Marty knows, he's been wonderful to us. You just have to support our work, meet with your members of Congress, talk to your members of Congress, email them, call them, go to fundraisers, gonna tell hall meetings, they need to hear from you, because if they don't know what you're thinking, and it does make a difference. I've been doing this a long time. It's really difficult and frustrating as hell, but it does work.
And how do people get involved with you, and how do people get on your mailing list?
I
and
got
how
my
do
card.
people
I'm happy to give you my
donate to you?
cards.
Is there like a donation on your website?
There's actually lots of ways you can donate on our website. Let's leave them here. So, we can, even from FUSA, we can take donor advised funds, private foundations, lots of different ways. So go to our website. This is Policy and Taxation Group cards.
And
and help us.
are you on like a matching platform as well? So like if people make a donation to you as a charity to do corporate matching? Are you
We
on
don't.
those lists?
You can find somebody
You
to do
want to
it.
get on those lists.
Yeah, no kidding. Yeah. Yeah, we're, and again, we're national, so we work at DC level, but we work with state organizations. There's a great one here in California. It's called Family Business Association. We're part of that as well. It works in state issues in California.
Right, yeah, I mean, you really do a lot with not a lot of capital behind you, so that's really fantastic. I mean, great achievements, so.
Yeah,
Thanks so
thank
much,
you.
Pat.
Thank you.
Great.